Hi there, I'm Judy Holland, and welcome to Happy Nest, the podcast where you can hear the latest research and best advice for living well when your kids leave home. Join me as I interview experts and explore how to reinvent yourself during this critical passage. I hope you'll head over to judyhollandauthor.com and check out my new book, Happy Nest, Finding Fulfillment When Your Kids Leave Home. Joining me on this episode of Happy Nest is Robert W. Levenson, a brilliant Berkeley professor. Bob has been conducting an ongoing study of baby boomers and their parents since 1989. He studies long-term marriages in middle and old age. To do his study, he invites tons of couples to his Berkeley lab for discussions. His work caught my eye when I was researching my book, Happy Nest. I was delighted to discover that his study included marital relationships as people move through major transitions, like when their kids leave home. When I called him a couple years ago, Bob told me this is not your parents' empty nest. He says many parents of baby boomers felt their purpose had ended when their kids left. They became rudderless and lost. But baby boomers are faring much better. Many are finding a renaissance in their marriages. Many are rediscovering why they fell in love in the first place. Baby boomers have, for the most part, lived lives full of passionate causes and interests. When the kids go, many of them pick up new hobbies or launch new careers. Bob says boomers are finding retirement is not an appealing prospect. It can trigger a struggle with identity. When they reach 65, many boomers are retiring, unretiring, and partially retiring. The meaning of work has changed. I'm delighted to have Bob on the Happy Nest podcast today to share his wisdom. Bob, why did you do this mother of all studies, and how do you do a big study like this? How many people do you study? How do you make sense of this?
So we decided to do this study because in the late 1980s, some papers came out that suggested that the divorce rate in the United States was going up from where it had been at about 50% of all marriages end in divorce. A couple studies came out that suggested it might be going over 60. And so we thought, well, it might be really interesting to, instead of studying couples that fail, which is what most people and us, what we had been doing, to find the marital survivors. So we decided to do a study of people who had married early in life and had stayed together for at least a decade and a half.
Bob, what's early in life for marriage?
Well, you know, we were talking about in that time, people often married in their 20s. So our younger sample, our kind of middle-aged sample, were people between the age of 40 and 50 who'd been married at least 15 years. Mm-hmm. So they sort of had to get married in their mid-20s. Mm-hmm. And then we had an older group, sort of their parents' generation, that were in their 60s and had been married at least 35 years. So again, you know, married early, married once, stayed together.
How do you get these people?
Yeah. Well, there are two strategies. You know, if you were doing a survey study, you would do a representative sample going around the country and getting people to complete questionnaires. But in our sort of perverse way, we wanted to actually see these marital experts in the flesh. And our thought was we would learn more by having them come to our lab and watch them in action. And so because that was the kind of study we were doing, we had to do it locally. Mm-hmm. So we started a procedure to recruit a sample of these successful marriages in the Bay Area that were representative of the community in terms of ethnicity, religion, and socioeconomic status.
Okay, and your lab is here, right?
At the time, it was in a different building, but it was just about a half block away, and so all of this work was done here at Berkeley. Mm-hmm. By then, John Gottman had gone to the University of Washington and at Seattle, and Laura Carstensen was at Stanford. So we all collaborated in planning this great study.
Yeah, cool. So why is this an especially good time to be an empty nester? I remember when I interviewed you a couple of years ago, I interviewed you actually right at the very beginning of my research for my Happy Nest book that'll be out in February. Because as a reporter, I know that you find somebody who's really smart and really in deep on studies, and you can steer what you're doing very smartly when you start with someone who's already looked at this, so you don't go off in the wrong direction and all that. So I was so delighted to find you, and to find that in your study you had stuff in there on empty nesters, even though that wasn't really the focus. That was just part of it.
Yeah.
So why, you told me back then that this is not your parents' empty nest. Why not, Bob?
Yeah, I think the old school version of marriage was very much focused on raising children and keeping them safe and preparing them for the lives that they're going to lead and the families that they're going to build. And thus, when the kids left home, that major purpose in the lives of parents really ended. And it was not unusual for people to become lost and rudderless and sometimes quite depressed. And I don't mean to say that people aren't still invested in their kids, and that when children leave home, it's not a significant issue. And I know a lot of my friends are planning the next decades of their lives to be close to where their kids are. So it's still a powerful draw. But in this same period of history, there were a lot of cultural changes, social changes, gender changes, and I think in American culture, marriage became seen not just as serving the needs of the kids, but also as a way to serve the needs of the parents. And that marriage became a way of completing yourself and fulfilling yourself and realizing dreams that you maybe couldn't do on your own.
The whole self-actualizing thing, right?
That whole self-actualizing thing crossed with the women's movement, which, in the lives, it's interesting, when we talked informally with people in this study, the women's movement was the single most transformative change in the lives of these marriages. Now women as well as men were thinking about, the second chapters in their lives, what they were going to accomplish, the things that they put aside, the books they wanted to write, the musical instruments they wanted to learn, the offices they wanted to run for, the businesses they wanted to start. And so all of a sudden, when children left home, this underlay of loss was compensated for by this excitement of opportunity. Now I can pursue these dreams that I put aside earlier in life, and it's a very powerful theme in the lives of these, particularly the baby boomers.
Mm-hmm. Now, not only my audience is beyond baby boomers, but a lot of them are baby boomers like me. I'm just barely on the line of a baby boomer. When we spoke before, you were characterizing for me the boomers versus the Gen Xers or the Great Generation, I suppose. So baby boomers, I think I recall you saying are especially well poised to be empty nesters because they've lived lives full of causes and passionate interests. Can you help me with that? Expand on that?
Yeah, I think, the life of a baby boomer is a sense of astounding victories early on, moving the political needle, moving the cultural needle, in the music and the arts and theater and the politics of the anti-war movement, and this sense that it was so influential. Now, whether this is true or not, but so influential that people decided not to run for re-election as president based on the voice of this generation. So there was a lot of early success. And then the realities of life set in, and the successes were fewer and farther between. So I think this opportunity to start again, this sort of bolus of free time, this energy that had been going into family life, and baby boomers, spent a lot of energy on being parents. They were very involved, and they had this sort of sense of their own control over the outcomes, and they wanted their kids to be a certain way. And, it's kind of a fool's gambit. But in the end, I think they were ready for another challenge, and maybe a challenge where they had a better chance of success, like to recapture some of the successes of their youth, of our youth.
Why, Bob, were boomers so hyper involved in raising their kids? Doesn't that have something to do with global trends, socioeconomic trends, the cost of housing, and the difficulty of getting into Berkeley?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is that as a generation, the boomers suffered from the illusion of control. The idea that if you just worked hard enough at it and you paid enough attention and you crossed all of your T's and dotted all your I's, you could control complex outcomes like who your children are going to be, as opposed to understanding that, your kids are on their own journey and, they're going to become the people that they're going to become. You'll have some influence, but you can't determine it. And I think that was part of it. And I think also the world started to feel like a more dangerous place. Boomers grew up in many communities. I mean, this is not universally true. Some boomers, of course, grew up in very difficult and dangerous situations. But my experience, sort of in the suburbs is probably typical. There's a sense of neighborhood. You grew up with other children. Parents looked out for other people's kids. There was a sense that you were being taken care of. And then the world got increasingly dangerous. And I think many boomers felt that an important part of their job was to make sure their children were safe. Mm-hmm. And so it was a kind of an illusion of control. They wanted them to turn out to be a certain way. And then this really important mission to keep children safe from the increasingly dangerous society that they were seeing around them. So I don't think it was just selfishness or narcissism trying to get kids to be just like them. But I think these cultural changes really made the world kind of shape boomers in this way, and they were very attentive.
Okay, so if you put lots of your energy into the kids, then there's less energy and less time for your spouse, probably, and there are, to some extent, you can end up having a kid-centric marriage and maybe ignoring your spouse is a little bit. I think that maybe has taken a toll. Is this part of what's happened with the strain on marriages, boomer marriages?
I think so. I think that it was a toxic cocktail. On the one hand, you had the expectations for the marriage that were going up and up, and the idea that this was going to be something that made your life even richer and more wonderful. And then you had all this energy going into kids and all this energy going into work, because this is also the generation where the single breadwinner really was replaced by everybody works, and and you might have multiple jobs. So all of this kind of sucked a lot of the life out of many marriages. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that people didn't love each other anymore, but they had trouble finding the time to really invest. And again, when kids left home, not only was this opportunity to change the world, but also to fall in love again and rediscover the relationship you were in. And that's for the people who stayed with the person. And then for other people, it's interesting. I don't know the data on it, but it feels like more people are moving on to a late life, a new marriage in later life, kind of starting over again. But again, this idea that I'm going to put some of this energy into this most important and intimate of human relationships, and my partnership with my spouse or.
Mm-hmm. And we're living long, and we're relatively healthier, and we're working longer.
That's right. And the world is not the province of the young. I mean, the world has adjusted to the aches and pains and limps and liabilities of the aging population. And so there are many things you can do that are lots of fun and very adventuresome My wife and I are leaving tonight, for a trip to the Galapagos.
Oh, I've been there.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. And, it's a trip that maybe when 40 years ago, if you were over 30, you might not do. But now it's sort of smoothed out, and it's very accommodating to.
I went with National Geographic. Did you go ahead?
We're going with a more kind of luxurious, and we'll take care of all the details.
Yeah. I went with 3 kids, my husband, and
that's the way to do it.
It was fascinating. This great, and the biologists were just right next to you, and they could answer all your questions and give you a cocktail at the same time. It was perfect. I
think we're going on the version where there's probably more cocktails and fewer biologists.
Yeah, well, you probably get enough learning around here anyway. So maybe we're seeing. Do you think, Bob? One thing I'm concerned about, especially as I'm turning 60 today, is that
happy birthday.
Thank you. Is this ageist society? Do you think we're seeing a little subsiding of that? America has always celebrated youth, and I'm in the journalism field, and I've had a lot of broadcast reporter friends, mainly women, who are fired or retired when they don't look 35 anymore. Do you think we have any shifts? I know you look at aging.
I think that's probably a generational thing. I think that in this aging boomer cohort, I think we are wrinkle blind a little bit, and we look at ourselves and we're thin and fit and full of energy, and we don't remind ourselves very much of our image of our parents, who at this age or even younger. But the reality is, when viewed through the eyes of a young person, they see us at our age, and so you have these kind of shocking things where you think you're a hip kind of contemporary, and then someone says, "Hey, old man," or "Hey, old woman," or or "Hey, pop," or something like that, or
bracing, isn't it?
You realize that we have these sort of young tinted glasses we see ourselves and our generation in, and but we are what we are. Biology is having its way with us, and so that's really important. I don't think that younger people see us in the same way that we see ourselves.
Bob, I was looking at some of your research. What kind of couples fare well and cope well with these transitions? And what kinds of people or couples fare poorly as they cross thresholds like this?
Yeah. Well, one of the interesting things about American marriage is that the needs, the demands, and the formula for success is a moving target. And one of the things that we found in one of our early studies is that if you look at these couples in midlife and late life, the couples that are doing the best and are happiest with their marriages are the ones where the partners are quite different than each other.
Wow.
Yeah. And yet,
that's challenging. That's a challenging. I mean, I married my complete opposite. That's challenging.
That was smart of you. See how smart you are. You should write a book on this. Yeah. Because
interesting.
At the beginning, it's probably smart to marry somebody, or seems to be, who has your values and comes from your background. It seems like it's an easier path. But later on, when life sort of starts to create these complicated challenges of age and wellness or lack of wellness, having that diversification. So, one of you's hyper organized and the other one's a little bit more spontaneous. One of you is very energetic, and one of you is kind of ponderous, and you cover the waterfront a little bit better, and you can deal with things collectively and collaboratively. And so the literature on aging started finding these things where couples were they called it, I think, collaborative cognition, and you watch older couples, they help each other with memory. One person does the checkbook and the other person no longer can do it. And the couples that really, I think, get through the rest of life most successfully have that complementarity. So interestingly, you would never think of that when you were young. First of all, you don't know what you aren't going to be able to do.
Right.
But
well, I knew what I couldn't do. I couldn't do science, and so I end up with a scientist.
Well,
right.
Again, and there's no one size fits all solution, but I think in general, that's probably a good plan. Yeah.
Interesting. It
Yeah.
wasn't a plan. It was just like, I'm not planned like that.
Yeah.
I'm random. I'm just kind of, isn't that interesting? So how, Bob, how do human emotions change as we age? Do we get better at marriage and generally at getting along with others? I think you called this somewhere the developmental course of marriage. Like, what's up with that?
Yeah, well, we in our research, we're very interested in human emotions, and most of the things we knew about aging until relatively recently in scientific times, we had been very taken by the changes that occur in our ability to think, our cognitive capabilities, and the changes that occur in our ability to engage in physical activities. And in both of those areas, there's no question from 30 on, it's a process of continuing decline.
Oh.
There are a few exceptions, like your vocabulary holds up pretty well. So as a writer, memory not so good, yeah. But so the assumption was that your emotions probably were like that too, and that as we got older, there were theories of this, our emotions sort of shut down and we became kind of burnt out and uninvolved. So when we started actually studying that in the laboratory, and we disentangled age from health, so we started studying people who were still healthy in late life, we found that our emotions are very different, and that they not only stay intact, our ability to feel and to control our feelings and to understand the feelings of others, but in some areas they actually over time become more refined and powerful. And so older people tend to be able to experience compassion and sadness, this response to other people's suffering.
They get better
They
with
get
time.
better at it, yeah. And
Emotions.
older people are better, and this was really surprising, and we find this over and over again, that older people are better at understanding the emotions of other people in complex social situations. That's why I think, like, our parents often know our marriages are not working before we do, because that ability to make sense of real complex emotion in real time in social situations where everything's flying left and right and people aren't saying what they're feeling, we get better and better at that.
Wow.
And so...
so what would that tell us about older marriage? Wouldn't you get better at marriage or better at...
Yeah, I think you get better at marriage, but you have to, because the challenges are increasing as age takes its toll.
Health, things like that.
And for many couples, certainly in our country, finances become really a critical issue later on.
Especially this generation, and everybody helping their kids to the max.
So just to stay even, just to tread water, you have to be better and better. But I do think there is there's a sensitivity to the other person, and part of it's time. But older people have a certain kind of emotional wisdom.
Yeah.
And I think that is interesting that part of our brain doesn't age as quickly or in the same way as some of these other areas.
How do you find out something like that? Are you asking people questions in the lab? How do you do that?
Well, you can ask people questions, but people's ideas about their emotions are notoriously bad. So we develop tests in the laboratory that enable us to quantify. So we show people sad movies, and we see how much their heart rate increases and how much they
measure like
physiology. We measure everything, yeah.
It's a science measuring thing.
Yeah, we measure and we observe, and if we will do things like we'll show somebody a really unpleasant film, and we'll say, try not to let your emotions show, and we'll see how well they can do it, and we'll show people strangers in a real world social interaction, and we'll say, take a look at that wife, and moment to moment, let us know how good or bad she's feeling, and we compare it to what she said or what experts think. So we have developed these tests that tell us not what people think, because people have crazy ideas about their emotions, but really what their capacities are. And that's how we've been able to find that these really hold up over time.
Wow, that's how you get by all those peer review things, that you've got it all measured up and quantified, right?
Well, it's an approach. I mean,
So what about your research has also included looking at 21st century midlife divorces, I think, and divorces where there's no physical abuse, no fatal explosions, just two people with diverging values and dreams that drift apart. What have you found there?
Yeah, we really haven't studied that. So
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just an aside, in this sample that we've been studying, divorces are quite rare. You know, the risk time for divorce, the most risky period is the birth of the first child. That's where divorce really peaks.
Okay, why? You're tired?
I think it's most. First of all, it used to happen very early in marriage and early in life, and you really don't have that. You haven't made enough deposits in the marital bank, together, and then you have this thing which exhausts you. It takes your time. It all of a sudden detracts from your focus on each other. It becomes something very much. Men and women have very different, the challenges in adjusting to parenthood, and even with all of our, I don't know, maybe it's more complicated now because men are expected to play a more of a role, and for many men they have to learn how to be good fathers, and it's really important that they do.
Stressful.
So it's a really stressful period. It's a really stressful transition, and that is the single most vulnerable time in the course of a marriage. So in our study, we picked up people after that, and as a result, our divorce rates are very low. So it's not a good sample for studying divorce.
Yeah, okay. But in empty nesting.
Well, yeah, and so we were thinking that retirement and empty nest would be the great challenge in their lives. But then this interesting thing happened where, I think because of cultural changes and generational changes, for a lot of people, their marriages kind of had a renaissance. They fell back in love. Mm-hmm. So it's still not a good divorce sample.
Yeah.
There are lots of good samples for studying divorce, but not ours.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And it's also, empty nesting. I was an older mother when my son was born. I was 40, and I consider myself. I don't have any plans to retire. I can't imagine. I'm just doing things in a different form. So empty nesting doesn't necessarily overlap with retirement.
No,
right?
we thought it, when we designed the study, we thought that was going to be the case. And then when we got our first group of people past the age of 65 and we went and we sampled, we found that retirement in our day is, first of all, it's very dynamic. People retire, they unretire, they partially retire. It's just this never-ending target. But the idea that when you got to 65, you would stop working, the pension would kick in, and you'd go on Social Security, and that's just not the life that people live anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
You don't want that. I've actually had friends go in and out of it. A good friend of mine bought a house on some Canadian island and sat down to look at the wilderness. And he wasn't there very long.
Yeah.
He started a new career, and he's now making a movie in Hollywood.
Yeah.
He just had it.
Yeah, and I think the meaning of work has changed, and for some people, retirement is not an appealing prospect, and you see a lot of people who are dealing with finding their identity when they no longer have work if their work was really important to them. So it's a complicated issue, and it is not a kind of a cut point where you can say at a certain age everybody retires. So, and I think that adds to the complexity for marriage because this is something that couples have to deal with.
Yeah.
And couples who are doing a good job and have supportive relationships, they can help each other navigate through this.
Yeah.
And when that happens, you have a time that you come to appreciate each other more. some couples it doesn't work out. There's a lot of resentment, and then those are difficult times.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's interesting. My neighbor is Fred Wertheimer, who and his wife's Linda Wertheimer, who wrote the foreword for my book. And Linda kind of chuckles. Linda does some stories, but she kind of has a lot of friends and kind of, does some stories still for NPR. Fred is 80, and she says, and Fred is right out there, crack of dawn, and she says he's protecting the democracy. And she understands that and accepts that and plugs in with girlfriends and other people around town. But you just kind of adapt and adjust. But people are not getting in the rocking chair anymore.
Yeah, and people often say that if there's one suggestion, for building a good marriage, it's not to build a marriage around changing the other person.
Right.
And when we say that, we really think about early in life, but it's just as important late in life when people discover these last chapters that they want to pursue, and how do you sort of, and they might be impractical, and they might be kind of quixotic, but how do you support that, and how do you support each other as you go jousting at windmills in your 80s?
Yeah. That's a really interesting idea that you shouldn't be in the empty nest or any other time going into this relationship determined to change the other person, right?
Yeah. I think that's, and then the other thing is, if you think that the last decade of marriage is just going to be sitting in your rocking chair and just enjoying each other's company and having resolved all of the issues in life and just waiting for the Grim Reaper, that also is not very realistic. It continues, as people say, marriage continues to be a work in progress.
Right.
And in the end, we've gotten very interested in the last decade or so at how couples deal with changes in health, particularly the dementing disorders, which change cognition and personality.
Yeah.
And, those are as extraordinarily and profound a challenge as anything I think that anybody's ever imagined. And because we're living longer, and because we haven't made very much progress or any progress in really preventing or treating these diseases, almost everyone, every couple who lives long enough is probably going to have to deal with this.
Yeah.
And at some point in their life with their own parents, and then with their own health and well-being. So, and this can be extraordinarily difficult at the end of life. So this is it's a long-term process of challenge and dealing with challenge and doing it in a partnership. And if one of the partners is no longer as competent, it becomes extremely challenging.
Right. So we all have very different circumstances as we age and become empty nesters, so forth. But do you have any, just kind of looking at all this research you've done, how do we age well? Just kind of wrapping up, do you have some tips or pointers? What have you gleaned from these studies? How do we age well as we're getting older and looking for different kinds of truths and understanding and relationships?
Yeah, well, there are a couple of things that the research suggests. Laura Carstenson's work, which really kind of revolutionized social gerontology in this country, made it very clear that in late life, the importance of close relationships is preeminent. And that knowing that, I think one needs to be assaying, in addition to your financial well-being and, does your house need a new roof and, how your hobbies are holding up. You need to spend some serious time, looking at your social portfolio and asking yourself, do I have the kind of relationships with people who are meaningful to me that are going to carry me through this last chapter of life? So that would be the first thing. The second thing is something that I learned from working with couples who are coping with dementia and other late life diseases. And it's a general principle, and that is to appreciate and focus on the things that you can do, and not to overinvest in mourning the things that you can no longer do. when couples are dealing with dementia, for example, someone might lose their memory, be losing their memory. And, their life becomes focused around memory exercises but forgetting there are all these other things that the person still can do and appreciate. They might love music. They might still like to go for walks and things like that. I think that's the nature of our life, instead of when you get to be 70, just trying to be able to keep on running or jogging or something. The fact that, there's so many other things that you can do. You can appreciate art. You can go do some volunteer work and help other people. So it's really a matter of not fighting against the tide of loss, but embracing the currents of your ability, what you still can do well. So I think that's another thing. And I think that has implications for relationships too. To focus on the things that you both can do and both enjoy and that are not uncomfortable, and not spend all of your time being resentful of the things that used to be.
Yeah. No, I think that's wonderful. These are great philosophies to live by.
Yeah, I mean, who could do that? But, it's theory. Yeah,
it's a good thing to keep in mind.
Yeah.
And that's one reason we study things like this. And I am delighted to interview somebody like you, because we're really trying to glean truths and just kind of simple ideas we can keep in mind.
Yeah, I mean, the mindful quality of this is important, because if we just drift, I don't think we drift through late life in a very productive way. I think we have to do some planning. It's like, if you've seen a financial planner who's going to look at your kind of investment portfolio and help you make good decisions, you have to do that in the rest of your life too. You have to think about
and the other aspects.
Yeah,
right.
Your relationships, and also, your life work, your passions, your interests.
And the kind of altruistic big picture. How do the kind of eudaimonic focus, how do I contribute what's the best, highest part of myself, and how do I contribute that to the larger good? Yeah,
and I think there's the research now that's come out in things like gratitude and whatnot really suggests the importance of, one of my colleagues has used this expression, Dacher Keltner, wired for good. I mean, there's a part of us that is competitive and not so honorable, but there's also a part of us that seems to want to be helpful and derives great pleasure from being helpful. And you see it. We're talking today, a few days after 2 horrible shooting incidents, and you see people coming out right in the aftermath of that and being extremely helpful and caring. So that's in us. Yeah. And I think it not only helps the people who are in need, but it helps us to do that. So part of late life should be involved in giving back and giving back to your family, giving back to your grandkids, giving back to your community, giving back to your church, giving back to people who can learn from you. And I think that is a great benefit. Makes late life a lot more meaningful. And if you pass on some of the things you've learned, that can't hurt either.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, Bob, thank you very much for inviting me to your office at Berkeley today. This has been a wonderful and very enlightening conversation, and I'll be back in touch. And thank you very much.
Yeah, and I hope this turns out to be a bestseller, and then I can say I knew her when.
No, we'll do what we can. But again, I have to say that having the great privilege and feeling very grateful for I in my travels, I feel really very grateful that I have the opportunity to interview people like you, because it changes me. And in this writing of Happy Nest, this research has really altered the way I lead my life and the way I look at things, and I move very much more mindfully through things, and my relationships are better, and I also have come to the conclusion that relationships make the world go round. So we're on the same page, Bob. Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you very much, Bob.
Thanks for tuning into my Happiness podcast, where we explore how to get the best out of the empty nest. I hope you'll subscribe, write a review, and reach out to me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Check out my website, judyhollandauthor.com. Have a great day, and remember, make it happen.